Why was she the only one who couldn't get it right? That thought had followed Staff Sergeant Mara Keene for 2 weeks straight, growing heavier with every failed drill. She stood in the desert heat, rifle slipping in her hands, breath sharp in her throat. The others fired and reloaded like it was muscle memory. For her, every action felt foreign, like a language she'd once spoken but had somehow forgotten. The target downrange blurred through the heat shimmer. She squeezed the trigger. The round cracked out and went wide, too wide. The kind of miss that made instructors stare at their clipboards a little too long. She tried to reset, reload, but her fingers betrayed her. The magazine fought against her grip, clumsy, angled wrong. Precious seconds bled away. When the buzzer cut through the air, her target looked untouched. A failure in bold, black outlines. Behind her, the whispers started again. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Lieutenant Markham, perfect posture, perfect teeth, the kind of officer who'd never been tested by anything more dangerous than a drill instructor's temper, wasn't subtle about his amusement. His voice carried just far enough for the squad to hear. Guess some people's records don't transfer. Laughter followed, a sharp snicker from Peter, a low chuckle from Tors, a cutting little smile from Miller, who never wasted words when a look would do the damage instead. Mara's jaw tightened, but she kept moving, kept walking off the line. Her face stayed neutral. Her hands, though, had to remind themselves not to clench. She had learned to catalog faces the same way she cataloged terrain. They were just markers, potential hazards to be noted and filed away. But she could feel the weight of their eyes. Feel how the label was already sticking. Tourist. Dead weight. Someone who didn't belong. And yet there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. The barracks smelled like industrial disinfectant and years of boots. She claimed the corner bunk, back to the wall, clear view of the entrance. Old habits, the kind that stuck with you even when you tried to leave them behind. At chow, she sat alone, methodical with her tray, eating with the efficiency of someone who saw meals as fuel, not comfort. She could hear the others at their table, loud with youth, comparing scores like poker hands. She didn't look at them, didn't need to. Her eyes kept cataloging exits, angles, every door, every window, her body positioned so she'd see trouble before it walked through. The instincts of someone who'd slept in places where a wrong corner could mean death. Those instincts hadn't faded, not even now, but instincts weren't helping her on the range, or in the kill house. That afternoon, she froze again. The plywood door slammed open, the smell of training powder in her nose, and suddenly her weapon felt heavy, too heavy. The cardboard hostage fell before she could engage. Red lights, buzzer, another failure. She tried to push through the next room faster, desperate to recover. Angles wrong, sweep sloppy. By the time she finished, half her team was dead. The voices followed her out. That was painful, Markham announced, loud enough for the staging area. Seriously painful. Somebody's gonna get hurt if she keeps freezing like that. Maybe she should try accounting, Miller added. Peter's laugh was thin, nervous. Tors cracked his knuckles, leaning into the bulk of his body as if to remind everyone how much larger he was. I don't know what she did before this, he said, but it sure wasn't combat. The words sank into her ears but didn't leave a mark, at least not one she showed. She stripped her weapon, cleaned it with quiet hands, and walked out. No acknowledgement, no defense. Silence was safer. But silence can fool people. Master Chief Rains wasn't fooled. He had been watching. Where others saw hesitation, he saw precision, a kind of careful containment. During breaks, she moved through the base like someone who'd memorized it, gear arranged to a surgeon's standard. And when she thought no one was looking, her hands flew through weapon drills with the ease of an old rhythm. Reload smooth. Transitions clean. Exactly the opposite of the fumbling wreck she showed on the record. Rains recognized the type. He'd spent decades around quiet professionals who did their jobs, collected their pay, and disappeared. People who made warfare look easy because they'd survived long enough to turn it into art. He also knew what happened when those same people broke. Sometimes the body kept moving, but the machine underneath stopped working right. Sometimes ghosts caught up. Which one was she, broken or dormant? The answer didn't come quickly. By the end of week 1, the nicknames were stuck. Tourist, dead weight, mutters that followed her through chow lines and obstacle courses. Mara endured them with the same steady pace, but the obstacle course didn't endure her. The flashbang went off, a sharp crack, white light burning behind her eyelids, her legs locked. Not a tactical pause, not controlled cover, just frozen. A marionette with its strings cut. 15 seconds stretched into an eternity. By the time her breath steadied and she pushed forward, it was already over. Another failure. The whispers that night weren't mocking anymore. They were uneasy, PTSD, shell shock, broken. Words tossed around like diagnoses from people who'd never lived through what she had. Markham, of course, said it bluntest. She's broken. Somebody needs to tell her before she gets herself or someone else killed. She heard every word. Lying on her bunk, turned to the wall, fists clenched once before she forced them open again. Her face never moved. Silence again, her armor. The next morning before dawn, Rains found her on the range. Alone, running weapon drills in the pale light. No instructors, no audience, just her and the mechanics. Magazine changes crisp. Malfunction clearances perfect. Every movement the mark of someone who knew this craft inside out. Not broken, not lacking skill, something else. But what? The second week brought team exercises, and with them humiliation. She landed in Markham's squad. His grin was almost too wide when he saw the roster. Outstanding, he'd said. Just what we needed, a wild card. From the first building it went wrong. She hesitated. Peter went in alone, died quick. He made sure everyone heard his accusation. Thanks a lot, dead weight. The exercise spiraled. She took the rear position, followed orders even when they didn't make sense, and watched as her squad racked up simulated casualties. By the third building, the instructors weren't even pretending anymore. Squad 4 is done, one muttered into his radio. Markham exploded afterward, red-faced, sweating. This is exactly what I've been saying. You can't carry dead weight and expect to succeed. Torres gestured at her like the evidence was self-explanatory. Should have been obvious from day one. Miller cut cleaner. The question is, how long are we gonna pretend this is fixable? The paperwork was already moving. Medical discharge, performance under stress, insufficient. A kind dismissal wrapped in bureaucratic language. She had until Friday. A final evaluation, pass it or be gone. Everyone knew what that meant. Nobody expected her to make it, not after 2 weeks of this. And yet on Thursday, the black SUV rolled through the gates. The sound of its brakes squealed across the range, pulling every eye. The kind of vehicle that didn't belong here. Tinted windows, government plates. It stopped near admin. 2 figures stepped out. One of them mattered. Commander Cole Maddox. Tall, weathered, moving with the deliberate efficiency of a man who had lived too long in hard places. His eyes scanned the training yard. Sharp, calculating, they landed on Mara. She froze, not with fear, not with hesitation, but with recognition. Her hands pretended to check her rifle. Her mind was already somewhere else. Markham and his crew muttered questions. Who's the Navy guy? Why's he asking about tourists? Miller studied her posture, saw the sudden tension. Look at her, he whispered. She knows him. Rains tried to explain her failures, hesitations, freezing. Maddox cut him off with a raised hand. What if I told you she wasn't struggling? What if I told you she was holding back? He wanted one more run, just one, with him standing on the line, and 2 words, that's all it would take. Rains hesitated. Protocol said no. But protocol bent when a man like Maddox spoke with that kind of quiet finality. 2 words, that was his promise. 2 words, and everything they thought they knew about Mara Keene would change. The heat shimmered off the asphalt like a mirage, bending the air, making everything seem less real than it was. The training yard had fallen quiet, a silence thick with speculation. Trainees whispered. Instructors exchanged uneasy glances. Nobody knew why a Navy SEAL commander had shown up at their doorstep. Nobody knew why his eyes had fixed on the one person everyone else had already written off. But Mara knew. Her chest was still, her face calm, but beneath the surface something cracked open. She spent 2 weeks letting herself fail. 2 weeks carrying the weight of every insult and whispered label without once fighting back. Not because she couldn't, but because she wasn't allowed. Her leash was tight, her instincts suppressed by something stronger than pride or fear, something buried deep, something no one here understood. Until now. "Ghost knife," Maddox said, his voice cut through the comms like steel. "Execute." The words hit her like a switch thrown in the dark. Her breath shifted, shoulders loosened, fingers tightened around her rifle with the familiarity of a lover's grip. 1 second she was Mara Keene, the hesitant, frozen, broken soldier. The next she was someone else. The squad had barely entered the first building when everything changed. Markham was leading as usual, barking orders like volume could make up for strategy. Peters fumbled through the doorway, caught by a hostile actor, and cursed as the buzzer marked him dead. Torres growled into the mic, "Move, Keene." Miller spat, "Keep up, tourist." But Mara wasn't hearing them anymore. She was hearing something older, deeper, the hum of geometry, the rhythm of violence. Her weapon snapped up to her shoulder with no wasted movement. The first target appeared in a doorway, 2 rounds, center mass, before the paper silhouette had even finished sliding into view. She flowed past Markham without looking at him, her body knowing where it needed to be before her mind could even shape the thought. Tor's voice cracked, "What the hell?" But she was already gone, water moving downhill. The second room cleared itself under her hands. Angles pre-read, corners owned before threats materialized. Her body moved with a precision too fluid to be rehearsed, too instinctive to be anything but ingrained. Rifle transferred from strong shoulder to weak, muzzle weaving through tight corners like it was dancing with the air itself. Miller stopped talking. By the time they hit the stairwell, the squad was no longer leading Mara. They were following her. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was efficient, clean. Every move chosen before it was required. Every shot fired exactly where it needed to be. There was no wasted breath, no wasted thought. She anticipated the firefight like she'd read the script before walking onto the stage. Rain stood in the observation area, arms crossed, jaw tight. He'd seen good soldiers, great ones. But this was different. This was someone who understood combat not as chaos but as clarity. Maddox didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on Mara, unblinking, the faintest nod breaking the mask of his face. He had known it would happen. And it kept happening. Halfway through the second building, Mara's squad was struggling to keep up. Markham, once loud, was panting, sweat dripping down his temple, helmet askew. Peters forgot to speak into his mic when he called his next clear. Torres stumbled on a threshold, nearly tripping over his own boots. Mara, she was a storm wrapped in silence. At the third building, the scenario turned brutal. Apartment-style fighting, multiple threats, civilians scattered between targets, the kind of setup designed to overwhelm even the best squads. It was where Mara had frozen before, caught between memory and hesitation. Not this time. She scanned the entry with one glance and knew it all, the geometry, the threats, the sequence. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't hesitate. She moved. 3 targets down in the first 5 seconds. 1 to the left, 2 to the right, clean transitions like choreography. A hostage shielded by a hostile in the corner. 2 shots, 1 high, 1 low, before the instructor could even register her angle. Her squad stumbled after her, firing late, clearing spaces already owned. They weren't running the scenario anymore. They were watching it unfold in her wake. 10 minutes later, it was over. Not 30 minutes the allotted time, not 20, 10. The buzzer sounded, but this time it wasn't failure. It was the sharp, almost celebratory tone of success. Mission complete, hostages safe, course record shattered. For a long moment, nobody moved. Instructors stared at their stopwatches like the devices were broken. Trainees shifted uneasily, watching Mara as she calmly safed her weapon, removed her helmet, and stood like nothing had happened. Markham tore his helmet off, his voice strangled. What the hell was that? How? Mara looked at him, eyes calm. Her voice was level, almost flat. What was what? He couldn't answer. None of them could. Because everyone had seen it. The way she had transformed. The way 2 words had turned a failing soldier into something dangerous, precise, unstoppable. Rains exhaled slowly. Jesus. Maddox didn't flinch. He stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. "Chief," he said evenly, "I think we need to have a conversation about Staff Sergeant Keene." The debriefing room was small, sterile. A table, 2 chairs, walls that held secrets. Mara sat quietly, rifle disassembled on the table, hands moving through cleaning motions with the same rhythm she'd used for years. Maddox stood with Rains, explaining with measured words. "Ghost knife," Rains repeated. "That's not in any manual I've ever read." "Because it isn't," Maddox said. "It's not supposed to be." He explained what Mara never could. A classified program. Small teams, deep penetration, high-value targets in places that didn't exist on maps. Psychological conditioning. Compartmentalization. Suppression until authorized. A leash on instincts so sharp they could cut the wrong way if left uncontrolled. Rains frowned. So for 2 weeks she was what? Acting. Mara's voice was soft, but it carried. Not acting, contained. Her hands paused for just a second, then continued cleaning the rifle. The conditioning isn't a switch you flip, it's a leash. You learn to hold everything in, wait until the phrase comes. Until then, you're just contained. Maddox's eyes softened almost imperceptibly. She was the best of them, 3 years, 0 casualties, a perfect record. Rains shook his head slowly. So why put her here? Why let her fail? Mara answered before Maddox could. Her voice was quieter now, but each word carried weight. IED, last mission, close quarters, I took the hit. Her eyes stayed on the rifle. Rotation stateside while they decided if I was still fit. The silence stretched. Rains finally asked, "And are you?" Maddox gestured toward the observation room, where her name now sat at the top of the course record. "You saw it, Chief. Does that look compromised to you?" For the first time, Mara looked up. Her eyes weren't broken. They weren't hesitant. They were steady, dark, and endless. "I wasn't failing because I couldn't do it," she said. "I was failing because I wasn't allowed to." Rains sat back, the truth settling into him like weight on a scale. The squad's insults, the mockery, the doubts, it had all been aimed at someone who'd been living with chains on her own strength. And when the chains broke, the world shifted. The record stayed. Her dismissal paperwork vanished. A new assignment appeared in its place, advanced tactical instructor, not a demotion, not a quiet exit, a recognition. Markham's voice disappeared after that. Torres stopped flexing. Miller stopped smiling that sharp smile. Peters even tried to apologize once, fumbling for words. Mara's answer was simple. "Most people do know, that's kind of the point." He tried again. "But why didn't you just show us earlier, save yourself?" Her reply cut sharper than any reprimand. "Because I wasn't authorized to." What did they see when they looked at her now? That question hung in the silence of the mess hall. Forks scraped against trays, conversations hummed low, but every so often eyes flicked toward Mara Keene. Quick glances, not mocking anymore, something closer to unease. Maybe awe, maybe fear. She ate like always. Quiet, methodical, fuel, not comfort. Same corner table, same clear view of the exit, but it wasn't the same, not anymore. Markham and his crew sat 3 tables over. Their laughter was gone, their voices lower. Tors pushed food around his tray instead of devouring it. Peter twitched like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Miller stayed still, his sharp smile replaced with calculation. Markham. His eyes dropped every time they met hers. The silence was louder than the insults had ever been. She didn't need their respect, not really, but the shift carried weight. It pressed on her shoulders, heavy as any rucksack she'd ever hauled through desert or jungle. They didn't mock her anymore because they knew, they'd seen. But what they hadn't seen mattered more. The leash, the words, the conditioning that turned her from failure into fury. They didn't understand that without authorization, she was still the same stumbling, hesitant soldier. The leash was back on, even now. And every meal, every briefing, every drill since, she felt it tug. Rains noticed. He always noticed. His gaze tracked her in the quiet moments when she thought no one was looking. During exercises when she performed competently, never outstanding, never drawing attention. It was intentional, controlled. She was passing now. Not spectacularly, not shattering records again, just passing, good enough to blend, good enough to look normal, and Rains understood she was holding back again. The others didn't know what to do with that. Peters was the first to crack. He caught her outside the mess hall one evening, words tumbling out like he couldn't stop them once he started. "Look, we didn't know, all right, about what you could do. We thought you were just," he broke off, hands twitching, face flushing. "We didn't know." She looked at him steadily, then past him like scanning the horizon. "Most people don't, that's the point." He shifted uncomfortably. "But why didn't you just show us? Would have saved you all that grief." Her voice was steady, almost too steady. "Because I wasn't authorized to." He didn't have an answer for that. He just nodded once, awkward, and walked away. Tors stopped making comments. His size, once a weapon he wielded in every room, shrank under the weight of silence. He still flexed, still carried himself like he owned space, but not around her. He gave her distance, the kind that admitted respect without ever speaking it. Miller studied her differently. He didn't talk, didn't mock, but his eyes followed her in drills, watching her footwork, her weapon angles, the way she cleared a room, as if memorizing a pattern he could never truly learn. And Markham was unraveling. The arrogance that once dripped from every word was gone. In its place, doubt. He hesitated in drills now, glancing toward Mara as if waiting for her to take the lead. But she never did, not unless told. His confidence cracked where hers had sharpened. It left him hollow, questioning. And when a man builds his whole identity on being the best, watching someone surpass him without even trying can break something deep. Rains saw it all, and Maddox had warned him before he left. Don't try to hold her back. People like her have already given enough. At some point, they earn the right to pass it on instead of carrying it themselves. So when the orders came through, advanced tactical instructor, Rains wasn't surprised. She wasn't going back into shadows. She wasn't being thrown out. She was being asked to teach. But the orders didn't erase the weight she carried. Night after night, Mara lay in her bunk, back to the wall, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The barracks quieted, breathing of tired soldiers filling the air. But her mind replayed the flashbang, the paralysis, the IED, the explosion that had thrown her into darkness, shrapnel tearing, bones cracking. She'd woken in a hospital bed, white sheets, white walls, a doctor's voice explaining she'd survived, explaining the scars, explaining that maybe she'd never be operational again. Ghost knife operatives weren't supposed to break, but she had. And the leash hadn't just been protocol, it had been safety. For her, for everyone else. Now here, every success was haunted by that doubt. Was she still herself? Or just a shadow, flickering between what she used to be and what the world thought she was? Her squad had no idea. They thought she was dangerous, untouchable, maybe even invincible. They didn't see the nights she woke in silence, jaw clenched against screams that tried to claw their way out. Rain saw some of it, the tension in her shoulders, The way her eyes stayed open long after lights out. He didn't push, not yet. But the program wasn't finished. There were more drills, more tests, and though her dismissal had vanished, though her record now carried an impossible time at the top of the board, the instructors weren't done watching her. And neither was Markham. It happened during a navigation exercise out in the desert scrub. Compass, map. Squads split into fire teams, tasked to move across rough terrain and hit checkpoints under a ticking clock. It wasn't about speed. It was about cohesion, teamwork. Markham's fire team got lost within the first half hour. His map reading was off. His calls too rushed. Miller corrected once softly and Markham snapped at him. Torres muttered. Peter followed quietly, anxious as ever. Mara's fire team moved smoother, not perfect but steady. She didn't lead, but her quiet suggestions kept them aligned. A reminder here, a correction there, enough to keep them on course without anyone realizing she was steering. They hit the checkpoint on time. Markham's team didn't. When they all regrouped, sweat and dust coating fatigues, Markham's frustration boiled over. "This isn't fair," he spat, helmet hanging from one hand. "She gets to coast while the rest of us grind. She didn't even lead. And you all saw what happened in the kill house. That wasn't training, that was something else." Nobody answered. The silence cut him deeper than words. Mara looked at him once calmly, then looked away, like he wasn't even worth her time. That broke him more than a fight would have. That night, Rains found her again. She was cleaning her rifle in the quiet corner of the range, half-light painting her face in shadows. "You can't keep living like this," he said finally. Her hands didn't stop moving. Like what? Half in, half out, holding everything back until someone else decides to let you breathe. She set the rifle down, finally meeting his eyes. For the first time, her voice cracked, not loud, not breaking, but frayed at the edges. "What if I'm not safe without the leash?" He didn't answer because he didn't know. And in that silence, the weight of who she was, and who she wasn't anymore, settled heavier than ever. The next test was coming. Another scenario, another chance for ghosts to catch her. And this time, no one knew if Maddox's words would be there to unlock her strength. Why did the silence always feel louder before it broke? The training yard seemed still, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Squad Bravo lined up, helmets tucked under arms, weapons slung across their chests. The instructors explained the scenario in clipped tones. Night raid simulation, hostile compounds spread across the scrub, unknown resistance. It wasn't about speed. It was about endurance. 12 hours under stress. Mara listened, face calm, eyes steady. But inside, the question gnawed. What if the leash never loosened? What if Maddox wasn't here to whisper the words that had unlocked her before? Could she still carry herself through a mission, or was she nothing without that trigger? The whisper of doubt was cruel familiar. She'd heard it before. On a night lit by fire, when the blast of an IED had stolen sound from the world and left her flat on her back, choking on her own blood. Her team had dragged her out, but she'd felt the shift then. Something breaking, something locked away for good. The instructors didn't care about her doubts. The whistle blew. The exercise began. Markham's voice cut sharp through the comms. "Stay tight, eyes open. We move when I move." He sounded sure again, louder than he needed to. Maybe trying to drown out the memory of being outshone. Maybe trying to reassert control. But his voice didn't steady her. If anything, it scratched against her nerves. The first compound loomed out of the desert gloom, plywood walls painted to look like crumbling stone. Shadows flickered under artificial lights. The squad stacked up, rifles angled, boots shifting on the gravel. Mara's place was in the rear, again. Markham had shoved her there with a clipped order. "You cover, we clear." She didn't argue, she never did. The breach call came. Torres kicked the door. Peter stumbled in first. Miller swept left. Markham took the lead, barking directions with a confidence that looked good from outside but collapsed under the weight of real geometry. Angles uncovered, corners blind. They moved fast but sloppy. Mara followed, eyes cutting across spaces they missed, corners they left hanging. Her weapon tracked threats they didn't even register. She didn't fire, not yet. Not unless she had to. That was part of the leash. She could see the fight before it happened, but without permission, all she could do was wait. The first casualty was Peter. He called it himself. "I'm down," as a role-playing hostile tagged him with sim rounds from a corner no one had checked. Markham swore, turned the wrong way, and almost walked into another trap. Miller covered him with a burst of sim fire, barely saving the squad from embarrassment. Mara saw it all unfold. She could have prevented it. She had seen the angles, felt the tension before it snapped. But she hadn't moved, because she wasn't allowed. And in that pause, the doubt bit deeper. Was she protecting them, or just proving she really was broken? They cleared the compound slower than anyone wanted. When they regrouped outside, Markham's face was red with sweat and anger. "We lost a man in the first room. Unacceptable." His eyes cut toward Mara. He didn't say her name, but everyone knew where the blame was meant to land. The next compound came harder. More threats. More hostages. Markham pushed forward again, louder, sharper. Tors flexed through doorways like muscle alone could win a fight. Miller moved crisp but resentful, covering gaps no one acknowledged. And Mara followed, watching, measuring, fighting a war inside herself. Because every time a flash of light hit her eyes, her chest locked. Every time the crack of a sim round echoed, her pulse spiked. Her mind dragged her back, not to plywood and paint, to dirt alleys and burning metal, to bodies falling that didn't get back up after the buzzer. She froze once, just for a second, but in that second her weapon dipped. Her squad surged past her, and the voices in her head screamed, "You don't belong here." But then something else, not Maddox's voice, not the leash snapping free, just her own breath, sharp and ragged. "Move, don't think, just move." She forced herself through the doorway. The room opened into chaos, role players shouting, hostages screaming, muzzle flashes painting the dark. And for the first time without Maddox, her body remembered. Not fully unleashed, not storm water flowing, but something closer. Muscle memory clawing its way past fear. One hostile dropped, another fell back. Her shots weren't as fluid as before, but they were steady, precise, controlled. By the time the buzzer rang, the squad had cleared the compound. 2 casualties called, but the hostages were secured. Not perfect, not clean, but survivable. Outside, breathing heavy in the desert air, Markham couldn't keep quiet. "We're bleeding points because of hesitation. Again. If we had someone reliable at the rear, we'd be—" He stopped, looked at her, saw the sweat on her brow, the steadiness in her hands, the eyes that hadn't flinched this time. His words faltered. Miller spoke instead. "She kept me covered twice. I'd be out if she hadn't." The silence stretched. For once, Markham didn't argue. They pushed on. Hours blurred into a cycle of entry and clearance, failure and recovery. The desert cooled as night deepened, shadows stretching long, stars sharp above. The squad moved slower, bodies dragging, but Mara's pace didn't falter. Her leash still held, no ghost knife command, no full transformation, but piece by piece she carved out something else. A middle ground, not broken, not unleashed, just her. By dawn, they stumbled back into the yard, exhausted. Instructors tallied scores. Markham sulked, muttering about unfair setups and faulty role players. Miller sat silent. Tors slumped. Peter rubbed his temples. Mara, she cleaned her rifle like always. Rains walked past, eyes lingering on her longer than the others. He saw it. The difference. Not the unleashed storm Maddox had revealed, but not the broken soldier either. Something new, something earned. Later, when the squad drifted to bunks, Rains found her again. She was still awake, still methodical, gear laid out on her bunk like a ritual. "You didn't freeze this time," he said. Her hand stilled, then resumed, "Not as long." "That was Maddox's doing." "No," she admitted quietly, "that was me." Rain studied her, voice softer. "So maybe you don't need a leash." Her eyes lifted, dark and unreadable. "Or maybe I just don't know what I am without it." The question lingered between them, heavy as the desert night, because she wasn't sure either. And the next test was coming. Bigger, harder, designed to break even the best. She knew it, Rains knew it, everyone knew it. The only question was whether Mara Keene could face it without the leash, or whether her ghosts would finally drag her under. What happens when the test isn't about winning? That was the question humming in Mara's mind as the briefing unfolded. The instructors didn't sugarcoat this one. Final week, comprehensive evaluation, a scenario that mixed everything: navigation, endurance, fire discipline, hostage management, and the one element that always cracked even the best soldiers: uncertainty. They wouldn't know the number of hostiles. They wouldn't know the location of civilians. They wouldn't even know when it ended. The only way through was to endure until someone called time. Mara adjusted her gear, calm on the outside. Inside, her chest tightened. The leash was still there. Maddox hadn't returned. No one was going to whisper those words this time. Whatever she was, broken or whole, she'd have to face it on her own. Markham's voice broke through the tension. "We all know what's at stake. Do your jobs, stay sharp, and don't drag us down." He didn't look at her, but his meaning was clear. Miller's jaw flexed like he wanted to argue. Torres cracked his knuckles. Peter just swallowed hard. The buzzer sounded. The mission began. They moved through the compound under a bruised sky, twilight deepening into night. The first contact came fast. Two hostiles behind a barricade of sandbags. Sim rounds cracked, shouts echoed. Torres rushed forward, too aggressive, and caught a hit to the vest. He cursed, slammed a hand against his gear, called himself out. "Down one already," Markham snapped. "Keep moving." Mara's weapon tracked, precise. She fired once, twice, dropped both targets with calm efficiency. Not unleashed storm, not broken hesitation, just her. Enough to keep the team alive. But the scenario twisted. The second building was wired. Trip lines strung across doorways, IED simulators tucked into corners. Mara's breath caught at the sight. Her chest burned. Her ears filled with phantom ringing. The memory came uninvited. Dirt, smoke, metal shrapnel tearing, the sickening weight of blood. Her knees threatened to lock. Her fingers trembled against the rifle grip. The leash felt tighter than ever. "Move," Markham barked. "Clear it." Her vision narrowed. She could see every wire, every angle, every deadly echo of the past. And still, she forced one boot forward, then another. Not Maddox's words, not the leash snapping, just her will. She moved slow, steady, clearing wires, marking traps, guiding her team past each hazard with gestures more than words. They didn't even realize how close they'd come. Only she did. By the time they cleared, her undershirt was soaked in sweat, but her eyes were clear. The third compound was worse. Role players scattered like panicked civilians, screaming, shoving, begging for help. Hostiles mixed among them, indistinguishable at first glance. Every trigger pull carried weight. Kill or save. Wrong call and the score plummeted. Peter froze this time. His weapon wavered between two figures. I can't tell." Markham shoved past him, fired, dropped one. The figure fell, a red armband marking them civilian, not hostile. The buzzer blared. Penalty. "Damn it," Markham roared. The room erupted. Hostiles firing, civilians screaming. Chaos layered over chaos. Mara stepped forward. Calm, controlled. She didn't shout, she didn't rush. Her rifle tracked with certainty, her shots clean, her hands guiding civilians out even as she dropped threats. She moved with the quiet clarity of someone who'd done this for real. Not a game, not a drill. A life-and-death calculus burned into her bones. When the buzzer finally ended the chaos, half the room stared at her. Even the role players supposed to keep acting looked shaken. The instructors made notes, their faces unreadable. They moved again. Hours passed. The desert air grew cold, their bodies slower, their minds frayed. One by one, cracks appeared. Miller cursed under his breath at a missed shot. Peter stumbled. Markham's orders grew harsher, angrier, louder. And Mara, she carried the silence. But the real test came at dawn. The squad entered the final structure, exhaustion heavy on every step. Inside, a hostage scenario. A woman tied to a chair, blindfolded, trembling. 3 hostiles around her, weapons raised. Standard, manageable. Until the second door opened. And another hostage was dragged in. Young, barely more than a teenager. A plastic knife pressed against his throat. A hostile shouted demands, voice echoing. Choose, you save one, the other dies. It was a simulation, everyone knew it. Rubber knives, blanks, actors. But in the moment, sweat dripping, nerves frayed, it felt real. Too real. Markham froze. Miller's weapon wavered. Peter whispered, "Oh God." Tors muttered a curse. The instructors didn't intervene. This was the point, to see who broke. Mara's pulse hammered, not because of the actors, but because she'd been here before. Not the same room, not the same faces, but the same choice. Real lives, real death. And she had chosen, and someone had died. Her throat tightened, her vision blurred, her hands shook against the rifle. The leash tugged hard, the ghost screamed. But then her breath steadied. One, then another. She remembered Maddox's words, not the trigger, just the truth behind them. Ghost knife wasn't about killing, it was about clarity. Her rifle lifted, smooth, sure. 2 shots, both hostiles down before they could react. Third turned, weapon rising, and she fired again. Clean. The hostages lived. The buzzer screamed, success. For a long moment, nobody moved. The squad stared at her like they didn't recognize her. The instructors stared at their stopwatches again. And Mara lowered her rifle, expression calm, but her chest heaving with the weight of ghosts she hadn't shaken. Outside, Markham finally broke. This isn't training anymore. This isn't fair. She's not one of us, she's something else. Nobody answered, because deep down they knew he was right. She wasn't one of them, she never had been. But she was still here, still standing, still carrying it all in silence. And sometimes, silence was heavier than any battlefield. That night she sat alone on the range, rifle across her knees, the desert wind cold against her skin. Rains approached quietly, stood beside her without speaking for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was low. "You saved them, both of them." Her eyes stayed on the sand. Not always. He didn't press. He didn't need to, he just stayed. Because sometimes, the hardest battles weren't the ones with bullets. They were the ones fought alone, in silence, with ghosts no one else could see. Why did silence hurt more than words? That was the question gnawing at Lieutenant Markham as the squad filed back into the barracks after the final evaluation. Hours of chaos had stripped everyone raw. Dust clung to their fatigues, sweat dried into salt on their faces. The only sound was boots against the tile. Nobody spoke, not at first. Tors collapsed onto his bunk, too drained to posture. Peter stripped off his vest, muttering to himself in a way that sounded half like prayer. Miller sat stiff, his jaw tight, eyes darting as if replaying every decision in his head. And Mara moved with the same quiet precision as always. Gear disassembled, cleaned, reassembled, every step a ritual. Her face gave nothing away. Not triumph, not relief. Just the calm of someone who had carried the weight and set it down without asking for thanks. But silence ate at Markham. For 2 weeks he had defined himself by being louder, sharper, more confident than anyone else. His voice had filled the gaps. His arrogance had been his armor, but now his voice felt hollow. Every time he looked at Mara, he saw the truth. She had carried them. She had made choices under pressure that he hadn't dared to. She had shown him without saying a word that he was not what he thought he was. And it broke something in him. At dinner he finally spoke. His fork clattered against his tray as he looked around at the squad. "This isn't right. You all saw it. She's not one of us. She's something else. And we're supposed to just accept that." No one answered. Tors kept eating. Miller's eyes flicked up, then away. Peter shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Markham slammed his tray down. "She made us look like fools. You think anyone's gonna remember the points we lost, the mistakes we made? No, they'll remember her, and we'll be the ones who couldn't keep up." Still silence. Mara's voice came then, quiet, even. "Or maybe they'll remember we all walked out alive." The words cut sharper than any insult, because they were true. Markham pushed back from the table, fists clenched. "You think you're better than us?" Her eyes lifted, calm, steady. "I think I don't need to prove anything." It was the first time she'd ever said anything back. Not mockery, not anger, just fact. And it hit Markham harder than all the weeks of silence combined. That night the tension boiled over. The barracks had gone dark, the steady rhythm of sleep filling the room. But Markham couldn't sleep. His thoughts twisted, bitter. He rose quietly, boots silent on the floor, and crossed to her bunk. She was awake, she always was, eyes open, dark in the half-light. "What do you want?" she asked softly. He stood there, fists trembling. "I want to know what you are." Her gaze didn't waver. "I'm a soldier, same as you." "No," he hissed, "not the same. You freeze one minute, you're unstoppable the next. That's not normal, that's not real." His voice cracked, lower now, almost desperate. "What are you?" Her answer was a whisper, calm but final. "Someone who's seen too much." He didn't know what to do with that. He wanted her to rage, to fight, to give him something he could use. But she didn't. She just lay there, still, steady, refusing to give him the war he craved. He left, more broken than before. The next morning the instructors gathered them for the final debrief. Scores were posted. Mara's name sat at the top, not because she had been perfect every step, but because she had carried through where others faltered. Her record-breaking time from Maddox's test still stood, untouchable. And now her endurance under pressure had sealed her place. The others passed too, barely for some, but they passed. Markham stared at the board, his face pale. His name was there, but it didn't matter. He would never be remembered as the leader of Bravo 12. Mara Keene's shadow stretched too far. The debrief ended. Orders came. New assignments were read aloud. Mara's file carried a different weight. Advanced Tactical Instructor, Special Operations Training Command. Not a dismissal, not a burial in paperwork. A recognition. A beginning of something else. When they broke formation, Peter approached her first. His words stumbled out. "Look, I owe you. If you hadn't covered me in there, I'd be—" He couldn't finish. His throat closed. Mara simply nodded. "Then learn, next time cover yourself." Tors came next. No words, just a nod. A heavy hand pressed briefly against her shoulder, then gone. Respect unspoken. Miller lingered longest. His eyes narrowed, not in disdain but in calculation. "I'll never move like you do, but I can try." His tone carried no bitterness, just quiet determination. And mark him, he didn't come at all. That night the barracks emptied one by one as soldiers moved on to their next posts. Mara sat on her bunk, her bag packed, her rifle case closed. She felt the weight of the silence again, but it was different now. Not mocking, not condemning, just heavy. Rains found her there, as he always did. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, voice steady. Orders came through. "You're headed east. Instructor's billet." She nodded once. "I figured." "You okay with that?" Her gaze stayed on the packed bag. "I've done my time. Maybe it's enough to teach now." He studied her for a long moment. "Or maybe they just realized you're worth more than they thought." She didn't answer, not because she disagreed, but because she didn't know how to believe it. When dawn broke, she stepped into the desert air one last time. The training yard stretched quiet around her. The black SUV was gone. Maddox was gone. The leash was still there, buried in her mind. But for the first time, she felt like she could breathe around it. She walked to the gate. Her boots echoed on the asphalt. No fanfare, no applause, just the steady rhythm of someone carrying ghosts forward into whatever came next. Behind her, the whispers would linger. The story of the tourist who wasn't a tourist, the failure who wasn't broken, the quiet soldier who carried something deeper than anyone else could see. And ahead, new faces, new soldiers, ones who would never know what she had been, only what she chose to teach them. But ghosts don't vanish, they wait. And Mara knew hers would follow. Why did teaching feel more dangerous than combat? That thought hit Mara the first time she stood in front of a classroom. Rows of young faces stared back, some sharp with confidence, others dulled with exhaustion. Fresh recruits, mid-level NCOs, even a few officers sitting stiff like they already knew everything. They didn't know her, not really. To them, she was just another instructor, another name on the schedule. But the weight pressed on her chest, because teaching wasn't just about skills. It was about truth, and truth was heavier than any rucksack she'd carried into the desert. She started simple: rifle manipulation, room clearing, angles, speed, communication. Her voice stayed calm, steady, no wasted words, every sentence clipped, every demonstration efficient. The students leaned forward when she moved. Her steps were precise, her weapon tracking every corner with a natural rhythm that made even the seasoned ones sit straighter. They didn't know what to call it, but they felt it. And yet she kept it contained. No ghost knife, no storm, just enough to teach without revealing what lay beneath. But ghosts lingered even in classrooms. One recruit asked during a break, voice eager, half mocking, "Ma'am, what happens if you freeze? Like, what if you choke when it counts?" The room chuckled, nervous laughter. Mara froze, not her body but her breath. For a second the flashbang roared in her ears again, the IED detonating. She tasted dust and blood. Then she exhaled. Her eyes swept the room, steady. "You won't know until it happens, and when it does, you'll either move or you'll regret it for the rest of your life." The laughter died. The silence after was heavier than the question. She turned back to the board, kept teaching, but the ghosts hadn't loosened their grip. Outside in the instructor's lounge, whispers traveled. "She's different," one sergeant muttered. "Not like the others." Another frowned. "Quiet type, knows something she's not saying." Rains had warned her. Maddox too. People sense when you've been further than they have. It leaks into your movements, your eyes. You don't have to say a word. They just know. The students knew it too. They started watching her differently, not just listening to the instructions but studying her, trying to copy the way she moved, the way she read a room before stepping into it. They didn't have words for it, but they wanted it. And she had to decide how much to give them. Because Ghost Knife wasn't just training, it was conditioning. It was leashing something dangerous until the leash snapped. She couldn't pass that on, not the whole of it, but she could pass the discipline, the patience, the clarity. Still, there were nights she doubted. The barracks for instructors were quieter, lonelier. She lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to silence instead of snores. The leash still tugged at her mind. Some nights she almost whispered the words herself, testing if they still worked. She never did. The fear was too strong. What if she couldn't stop once she started? Then came the visit. One afternoon, after a long day of drills, a knock came at her office door. She looked up and froze for real this time. Mark M. He wasn't in fatigues anymore. He wore civilian clothes, plain, but the set of his jaw carried the same arrogance, except now it was thinner, frayed at the edges. "Mara," he said, no title, no rank, just her name sharp. She didn't move. "What are you doing here?" "Passing through, heard you were here, thought I'd see for myself." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, still playing the quiet professional. Her eyes narrowed. "You don't belong here." His laugh was bitter. "Neither do you." The silence stretched. He studied her, and for the first time she saw it, jealousy wrapped around insecurity. He hadn't recovered from watching her dismantle everything he thought he was, and he never would. "You think you're untouchable," he said finally. "But I saw you freeze, I saw you break. Don't forget that." She stood slowly, calm, steady. "And I saw you hesitate when it mattered. Don't forget that either." His mouth opened, then closed. He left without another word. But his voice lingered in her head. "I saw you break." The next week her class ran a live-fire drill, simulated urban assault. She shadowed from the catwalk above, eyes scanning, ears tuned. The recruits moved sloppy, predictable. She called corrections into the headset. Then it happened. A flashbang simulator detonated. Light, sound, chaos. She froze. Just for a second. Hands gripping the rail, chest tightening, ears ringing. Her throat closed. The memory surged: dust, fire, blood. She almost lost her footing. Then she forced herself to breathe. Once, twice. "Push," she barked into the mic, louder than intended. "Clear it." The recruits obeyed. They moved. They finished. The drill ended. But Mara leaned on the rail, her palms damp, her breath ragged. The ghosts hadn't left. They never would. Later, alone in her office, she stared at her reflection in the dark window. A soldier, an instructor, a ghost carrier. She whispered to herself, the words barely audible. "I'm not broken, I'm not unleashed, I'm something in between." The door opened softly. Rain stepped in as if he'd known she needed someone. He looked at her, no judgment in his eyes. "How'd it go?" She hesitated, then answered with brutal honesty. "I froze. And then I moved." He nodded. "That's all that matters." She wanted to believe him, but in her chest the leash still tugged. The next day, she walked into class and looked at the young faces waiting for her. And for the first time, she said something she hadn't planned. "You'll hear a lot about courage, about being fearless. That's a lie. Fear never leaves, it just waits. Courage is moving anyway." The room was silent, not mocking, not restless. Silent in the way people are when they're hearing something they'll carry. Mara didn't smile, she just kept teaching. But inside, for the first time, she felt the weight shift. Not gone, never gone, but lighter, because maybe ghosts couldn't be silenced, but they could be shared. And in teaching, she was finally beginning to understand. Survival wasn't just about pulling a trigger. Sometimes it was about passing on what you carried, so someone else wouldn't have to bear it alone. What does it mean to finish a war you never asked for? That question lingered in Mara's chest as the months passed. Teaching became her battlefield. Not gunfire and explosions, but silence, questions, the weight of young eyes watching her every move. Her classes grew sharper. Recruits left stronger. Word spread quietly. The quiet instructor, the one who never raised her voice, never wasted a word but made you rethink everything you thought you knew about combat. Some called her ruthless, others called her fair, everyone remembered her. But she didn't let them see the nights. The nights when silence pressed so hard she thought her chest would crack. The nights when she lay awake, leash tugging at her mind, ghosts clawing at her ribs. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She just breathed through it, steady until the dawn. One evening after dismissing her class, she stayed behind in the kill house. Alone. She walked the plywood corridors in silence, rifle in hand. Not firing, not training, just walking. Each corner reminded her of something else. A door in Kandahar, a hallway in Fallujah, a stairwell in some nameless compound that didn't exist on any map. She felt them all pressing in. At the end of the course, she stopped. The buzzer sounded automatically, marking the end. She lowered her weapon, chest rising and falling. And she whispered, almost to herself, "I'm still here." The sound barely reached the walls, but it reached her. That weekend, a graduation ceremony filled the auditorium. Young men and women stood at attention, uniforms crisp, eyes bright. Their families filled the bleachers, clapping, cheering. Mara stood in the shadows, watching. When one of her students, Peter's younger cousin, coincidentally, accepted an award for top marksmanship, he paused to glance back at her. A small nod. Respect, silent and heavy. She nodded back, nothing more, nothing less. Afterward, Rains found her outside, leaning against the wall, hands in her pockets. "You never sit with the others," he said. She shrugged, "Not my place." He studied her for a long moment. "You ever going to believe you belong here?" She didn't answer. Instead, she looked out at the horizon. The sun was setting, streaking the sky with fire. Belonging doesn't matter. What matters is they walk out better than they walked in. Rains exhaled softly, almost a laugh. "You'll never give yourself credit, will you?" "Not my job," she said. But that night in her empty room, she let herself think about it, just for a moment. About the ones she'd taught. About the ones who might live because of something she said, some angle she corrected, some silence she filled with truth. Maybe that was enough. Weeks later, orders came down. A training rotation overseas. Partner program with Allied forces. She would be leaving again, not into combat but into classrooms carved from concrete, shooting ranges ringed by mountains. The desert followed her everywhere. On the plane, she sat alone. No one spoke to her. They didn't need to. Her silence was company enough. Landing in a new country, she walked through gates lined with foreign flags, young soldiers in unfamiliar uniforms watching curiously. She nodded once, stepped inside, and started again. It was always the same. Faces doubted her at first, then studied her, then followed her. One night after a brutal navigation exercise through mountain passes, a recruit collapsed on the ground, tears mixing with sweat. "Ma'am, I can't do this. I'm not strong enough." Mara knelt, eyes steady. Strength isn't about never breaking. It's about standing back up every time you do. The recruit looked at her, wide-eyed, and nodded, stood, kept moving. And Mara felt it again. Not pride, not triumph, just the steady certainty that what she carried wasn't wasted. But the ghosts never left. Some nights she woke to phantom blasts. Some days a flash of light in training stole her breath for a second too long. The leash never vanished. The scars never faded. She didn't expect them to. Because war doesn't end when you leave it, it stays. It lingers, it shapes. She accepted that. And maybe that acceptance was its own kind of freedom. Months later, she stood on a balcony above a training yard. The recruits were drilling below, their voices echoing against the walls. Rains had joined her for the overseas rotation, and now he leaned against the railing beside her. "You ever wonder," he asked quietly, "why you?" She tilted her head. Out of all the ones Maddox could have chosen, out of all the ghost knife operatives, why you're still here, why you're the one teaching instead of disappearing into shadows again. Her eyes stayed on the recruits. "Because I broke, and because I didn't." He frowned. She explained, voice soft, almost lost to the wind. "The broken ones disappear. The ones who never break go back. I was both, broken and still here, that's why." Rains nodded slowly. Down below, the recruits shouted cadence, their boots pounding rhythm into the ground. And Mara felt the weight of her ghost settle, not gone but balanced. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout. Sometimes it doesn't even speak. Sometimes dignity just acts. And in the silence of that moment, with the desert wind cutting across the balcony and the echoes of young voices rising up, Staff Sergeant Mara Keene finally understood. She wasn't fighting to be whole again. She was fighting to make sure they never had to carry as many ghosts as she did. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.